Oh, good, you guys got it.
This will be a long road, but any fight in the name of justice is worthy of divine recognition and will always be vindicated. Now, with that said, there's one man who still fights for us. There's one man who has become a beacon of hope for those of us who believe in a world more prosperous. There's one man who defends us from the monster that is the establishment. It is my pride and privilege to present to you Dr. Ron Paul.
Colorado, Friends of Liberty. It's great to meet all of you. Today I have two members of my family with me, my wife Carol and granddaughter Lisa. Thank you. It's really great to be here and hear the enthusiasm, a nice introduction. And I love coming to the college campuses because for some reason we get very good receptions on college campuses. But it is an important moment in our history of what's going on because there are great significant changes. In other words, I believe we're in a transition now from an economic system that was deeply flawed. We lived on borrowed money and borrowed time and printing press money and a pretense that we could do it forever. And about 4 years ago, it was discovered it was unsustainable. And now we have to face up to the truth, admit the truth, that once a country has lived way beyond its means, it's forced to live beneath its means. And now we have to make a decision on how to do that. And fortunately, it's not all that painful if we do the right things. All we have to do is return to our constitutional government, and believe me, we can get out of this mess in a very short period of time. It sounds pretty easy, and I'd like it to be easy, but the big challenge is you have to challenge the status quo. There's a lot of special interests out there that don't want to rock the boat. When you come to the military-industrial complex, you come to the banking system and the Federal Reserve System and the welfare state, there's a lot of special interests. So the contest is going on right now between those who want to assume responsibility for themselves and those who want to live off others. Those of us who want to take responsibility for ourselves and make sure that we can keep the fruits of our labor, believe me, if we win this, it will not be difficult. It'll be a much more freer and more prosperous and more peaceful society if we can achieve that. One basic question that the founders asked when they were pretty upset with the king. They didn't like the role of government, they didn't like the role of the king, and they did something about it. They knew exactly what they believed in. They understood the classic. They understood up into that period of time what the history of liberty was all about. And they decided they didn't want to live under the king. And there was a revolution. They wrote a document that was up until that time, and the best. It's still a great document. The tragedy is we don't follow it, and this is the reason that we must ask the same question again. What should the role of government be? The founders concluded that the role of government shouldn't be complicated. It should be to protect liberty. Nothing more complicated than that. That means protect the individuals and protect the right for you to keep the fruits of your labor, to honor and protect property rights. If we did that, we would get back to our roots. But unfortunately, over many, many years, we have drifted away from the concept of individual liberty in a republic. And unfortunately, we have accepted the dominance of a democratic society where the majority dictates to the rest and undermines the individual liberty that we all should cherish. they would have to change the foreign policy. And a lot of time I'm accused, they said, Ron, you're doing real well. They like your economic policies. They like this sound money and personal liberty side. But you got to get off this kick about your foreign policy. You know, and they said, because your numbers would grow tremendously if you would just adapt to the neoconservative warmongering group. Idea that people like you are out there and saying one of the main reasons why you are interested in our campaign is because we do have a new foreign policy, one designed to protect this country but not to be the policeman of the world. For the last 100 years, we would have fought a lot less wars because, very simply, no war should be fought unless they were declared. And unfortunately now our presidents go to war without declaration, without consultation, and it's not one party that has at fault. It's both parties have been doing this for decades. That's why we need to renew our determination to strictly adhere to the Constitution, especially with the war power issue, and make sure that no president can go to war on his own and then pretends he gets the authority from NATO or United Nations. So what would this mean? Economically, it would be a real boost. In the last 10 years, our national debt went up $4 trillion in the past 10 years because of fighting these wars. So there is an economic consequence of fighting wars. But of course, there is another physical and a life complication for it too. People lose their lives. A lot of our people lost their lives. You know, if you add up all the lives of Americans lost in these last 10 years, both wars, and you add up the contractors, it's almost 10,000. There's 40,000 severe injuries, hundreds of thousands of military personnel coming back, begging and pleading for help. There's an epidemic of suicide from the people who have served overseas. And it's because the foreign policy is deeply flawed, and we have to change the foreign policy of this country. It's all the current president's fault, and all we have to do is to change the president. But if you change the president and get another president who believes the same thing, it's not going to do any good. Matter of fact, our foreign policy, unfortunately, was started by Woodrow Wilson. That's how far back it went, because he said that it is our moral obligation to be an idealist and make sure the world is safe for democracy, and that we have this moral obligation to spread it with the use of force, and we've been in endless wars ever since. But the big difference now is we're bankrupt. You know, the Soviet system came down not because we had to fight them. I was drafted at the height of the Cold War in the 1960s. They had 30,000 nuclear weapons and missiles that they were aimed at us. We didn't have to fight them because they came down for economic reasons, which was a predictable event by the Austrian free market economists. The socialism doesn't work. It always fails. On top of it, the Soviets had this empire, but they went one major step too far. They were so foolish as to invade and occupy Afghanistan. And that is what brought them down. You'd think we'd learn a lesson. So here we are, bogged down. At the same time, you know, we're pretending the war ended in Iraq. It didn't end. Today, they're negotiating for sending more troops back in Iraq because it's not going well. I mean, we have a presence around the world. Nobody even knows. They asked Nada the other day, how many countries are you in? He said, what, I have to stop and think? I don't know how many countries we're in. Well, the number is probably about 130. We probably have 900 bases around the world, and we are bankrupted. We can't afford it. We need to cut across the board. But I think the easiest place in the world for us to bring coalitions together is cut the needless, senseless wars and the presence we have around the world, and just to mind our own business for once. guessing we could do that rather rapidly. Matter of fact, since a president took us into these wars without proper permission, that means a new president who has the right attitude about it could end those rules, end those wars as well by just ordering the troops to come home. And without, dismissing this military personnel immediately as they would come home, guess what? They spend all that money here at home. Might even be an economic stimulus by bringing all this troops home. It has to have a change in foreign policy. People who do make the case and say, no, Ron Paul's a dangerous person. He wants to cut this and cut that. He actually wants to believe in the Constitution. What a dangerous idea that is. But the whole thing is, you don't have to cut defense. You cut military. You cut all this activity that doesn't serve our interests, that undermines our defense, endangers us ourselves more so we would have more defense. Defense is a proper role for the government, and we should have it. But if we equate any military expenditure with defense, that means nobody can cut anything. But I say you could bring people together and come up with economic common sense and common sense on foreign policy and change it, and that's where we could cut a lot of money. But my proposal is in the first year, it's feasible and necessary to cut the budget by $1 trillion to get it started. World War II, the budget was cut approximately 60% from what we were spending, and a lot of the liberal Keynesians said, oh, that's going to bring back the Depression, and there will be so much unemployment, we have to have a jobs program and do all these kind of things. But actually, after World War II, they cut the budget by 60% and taxes by 30%. And guess what? We finally got over the Depression, and jobs came back again. So this whole idea of government spending to create wealth, it failed. It brought us this crisis. And that's all they've been doing for 4 years, and we're not out of it. The question is, who gets to spend the money? And I would say if the government quit spending $1 trillion and you get to spend $1 trillion, maybe you would spend it more wisely than the bureaucrats in Washington. But an important reason to be very keen on understanding what the wars do to us, it undermines our economy, and it undermines the moral standards of the people. It undermines our defense against personal liberties, because when wars are going on, the people are expected to sacrifice their liberties. But let me tell you, I've come to the conclusion that I firmly believe that there is never a need to sacrifice personal liberty for security. Never. Too many people believe otherwise, especially since 9/11. There's been this idea that, oh yes, sacrificing a little bit of liberty is going to make us a lot safer. Well, I'll tell you what, all you have to do is look at a few of those TSA agents prodding people at the airport, and if you think that makes you safer, we have a big problem, but it doesn't make you safer. After 9/11, and understandably we were all very, very concerned, and we should have reassessed our foreign policy and done a lot of other things. But the very first thing they did, the first bill passed after 9/11 was passed a bill that had been floating around for years, and they couldn't get it passed because the environment wasn't right. But as soon as the post-9/11 environment occurred, they brought it back out and they passed that terrible bill called the Patriot Act. Should never have been. If we truly want our liberties back, we should start by repealing the Patriot Act.